The Zarkari Empire had ruled the stars for centuries, an unchallenged force that expanded ruthlessly. To them, humans were just another primitive species, a minor footnote in the grand history of galactic conquest. Unlike the older, more established, alien civilizations that bowed to Zarkari rule, humanity was still young, still naive enough to think they had a say in their fate. From the moment the Zarkari made first contact with Earth's colonies, they treated humanity with the same disdain they had for countless other conquered races. They saw them as physically weak, too emotional, too reliant on outdated kinetic weaponry, and ultimately incapable of resisting a true galactic power. The Zarkari did not negotiate. They took what they wanted. And now, they had taken people. The attack on the human colony of Vega Prime had been swift and brutal. Zarkari warships descended from orbit, raining plasma down on planetary defenses, reducing entire city blocks to molten rubble. Their ground forces, towering four-armed reptilian warriors clad in segmented armor, swept through the streets, rounding up civilians like cattle. It wasn't just about conquest. The Zarkari had a tradition of taking prisoners, not just as slaves, but as test subjects. They saw themselves as the architects of evolution, experimenting on lesser species, enhancing them, modifying them, or simply studying their weaknesses. Humans were a curiosity to them. How much pain could they withstand? How did their fragile biology compare to the more robust species in the Empire? To the Zarkari, this was nothing more than a routine raid, another nameless colony, another group of test subjects to process. They did not expect humanity to resist. They did not expect Ava Connors. The Zarkari prison camp was an ugly thing, built hastily on the outskirts of Vega Prime's ruined capital. Massive metal barriers jutted out of the ground, enclosing the compound in an electrified dome. Guard towers manned by Zarkari soldiers overlooked rows of prison cells reinforced with energy fields. Inside, human captives huddled together, beaten but not broken. Among them sat Sergeant Ava Connors. She had been off duty when the invasion started, relaxing in the colony's outskirts, far from the initial battle. By the time the alarms blared, it was too late to mount a defense. The planetary militia was overwhelmed in hours, and Ava, separated from her rifle and gear, was dragged into captivity along with the others. To the Zarkari, she was just another human, a woman, weak, a species that relied on numbers rather than individual prowess. They did not realize that Ava Connors was not just another human. She was a United Earth Defense Force sniper, one of the deadliest marksmen in her unit. She had spent years mastering the art of the kill, long-range, mid-range, close quarters. It didn't matter. To her, every battlefield was a hunting ground. She had taken lives from miles away with a single pull of the trigger, and she had slit throats in the dead of night without a sound. She did not fear war. She was war. Yet here she was, shackled and unarmed, sitting in the cold metal confines of a Zarkari prison. Commander Varesh, the Zarkari officer overseeing the camp, found humans amusing. He took pleasure in walking the rows of captives, looking down at them like insects trapped in a jar. "You humans struggle so much," he mused, his voice deep and guttural, filled with condescension. "Yet in the end you fall just the same." He stopped in front of Ava, tilting his head slightly. A female, fragile, small. "I wonder, how long would one like you last in the pits?" She said nothing, just stared. The silence unsettled him. He scoffed, moving on. Assuming her spirit was broken, Ava had no intention of breaking. She was watching, listening, memorizing. Every shift change, every weapon placement, every mistake the Zarkari made. They underestimated her. That would be their first mistake. The moment the broadcast reached Earth, humanity's response was not one of fear. It was not one of surrender. It was rage. The images of Vega Prime burning, of civilians dragged from their homes, of human women and children being herded into cages like livestock, these were not just acts of war. They were an insult, a challenge. The United Earth Defense Force did not hesitate. A full-scale war declaration was issued within hours. The fleets mobilized, planetary defense forces activated, and in the darkest corners of military intelligence, a classified operation was greenlit, Project Retribution. It was not about diplomacy, it was not about negotiations, it was about sending a message. Captain Adrian Blackwell, a veteran of the UEDF, was chosen to lead the strike team. He had seen war before, had fought in the brutal conflicts against rogue colonies and pirate factions. But this was different. This wasn't just a mission. This was personal. "This isn't just another skirmish," Blackwell said as he addressed his men. "This isn't a tactical engagement. This is the line. They crossed it. We're going to remind them why humanity doesn't break. We're going to bring our people home. And we're going to make them regret ever touching one of us." The plan was simple: strike fast, strike hard, leave no survivors. The Zarkari believed they had already won. That was their second mistake. Ava sat in her cell, unmoving, but her mind was racing. She had been in hostile territory before, deep behind enemy lines with no backup, no way out except the one she carved for herself. She knew how to wait. She had already identified 5 possible escape routes, 3 weaknesses in the energy barriers, and at least 2 guards who were sloppy with their patrols. Most importantly, she had observed one fatal flaw in the Zarkari's security: their arrogance. They thought they had already won. They left weapons lying within reach. They didn't bother to double-check shackles. They let their guard down. Ava flexed her fingers. The cold metal cuffs around her wrists were tight but not unbreakable. Soon, she wasn't just going to escape, she was going to hunt. The Zarkari had always seen war as a spectacle, a brutal dance of dominance where the strong devoured the weak. But in the prison camp on Vega Prime, they turned their cruelty into something more personal. They did not just capture humans, they broke them, shattered their spirits piece by piece. The prisoners were not just starved or beaten, they were made to suffer for entertainment. The Zarkari guards forced them to fight each other for scraps of food, laughing as friends were pitted against one another. Those who refused were tortured, their screams echoing through the cold metal corridors. And when the guards grew bored, they chose victims at random, dragging them away to be used in sadistic experiments or left to die under the scorching alien sun. The camp reeked of hopelessness, but not everyone was broken. Ava Connors had seen horror before, had walked through the blood and fire of battlefields long before she was captured, and she had learned something that the Zarkari did not understand. Fear was a weapon. It could break men, but it could also forge them into something stronger. The other prisoners noticed her calm, the way she observed everything, the way her gaze lingered on the weaknesses in the guards' routines. She didn't fight in the pit, didn't waste her strength on pointless struggles. Instead, she studied. She listened. And when she spoke, it was with purpose. A flicker of a hand signal. A whispered word in the dead of night. A glance toward an unguarded supply cache. Slowly, the remaining soldiers among the prisoners started to take notice. They passed silent messages, counted the guards, memorized shift patterns. Even the civilians, beaten and terrified, started paying attention. Some of them had lost everything, and all they had left was the fire of revenge. Not all prisoners had the strength to resist. Some had already given up, their eyes hollow. Others wanted to fight but had no direction. Ava became the center they rallied around. She did not give speeches, did not promise victory. She simply prepared for war, and those who still had the will to fight followed her lead. The Zarkari thought they had conquered Vega Prime. They were wrong. One night, a Zarkari guard made the mistake of thinking Ava was just another broken prisoner. He was bored, tired of the routine and looking for a distraction. He singled her out, dragging her from her cell with a cruel smirk. "You humans," he muttered, gripping her chin roughly, forcing her to look up at him. So fragile, so weak. Ava didn't resist. Not yet. She let him think he had control. The guard leaned in closer, his claws scraping against her skin. That was his final mistake. In a single, fluid motion, Ava twisted free, her hands moving faster than the Zarkari could react. She grabbed the knife from his belt, spun it in her grip, and drove it deep into his throat. The alien gurgled, his eyes wide with shock. Ava watched as the light drained from them, her expression calm as she twisted the blade once more before pulling it free. The body hit the floor with a dull thud. Silence. Then movement. The other prisoners had seen. The soldiers among them exchanged glances. And then, one by one, they nodded. Ava crouched, wiping the blood from the blade onto her tattered sleeve. We start tonight. Weapons were scavenged. Plans were whispered. The resistance had begun. Varesh was not a fool, but he was arrogant. He had overseen dozens of prison camps, had crushed more rebellions than he could count. To him, the humans were just another insignificant species, barely worth the effort of maintaining security. That illusion shattered when his guards started disappearing. At first it was subtle. One missing sentry here, another gone there. They assumed it was desertion, incompetence. Then they found the bodies. Throats slit, weapons stolen, blood smeared across cold steel floors. The humans were fighting back. Varesh's temper flared. He stormed into the center of the camp, his booming voice cutting through the night. "You think this will save you?" He snarled at the assembled prisoners, his golden eyes burning with rage. "You think killing a few guards will change your fate?" His warriors dragged a dozen prisoners forward, those too weak to fight, the sick, the elderly. "If you will not obey, then you will watch your people suffer." He raised his clawed hand, signaling for an execution, but the shot never came. A single sharp crack echoed through the air, and the Zarkari executioner's head snapped backward, a bullet tearing through his skull. Silence. Then chaos. The floodlights cut out. Explosions erupted across the camp. Zarkari soldiers scrambled, their once precise formations collapsing in the face of an unseen enemy. From the shadows, human prisoners struck. Ava had waited for this moment. Using stolen weapons, she and her fighters moved like ghosts through the camp, striking from the darkness, cutting down Zarkari before they could react. The arrogance of their captors had become their greatest weakness, and now they were afraid. From orbit, Captain Adrian Blackwell watched the battle unfold through his tactical visor. The strike force had arrived. The UEDF warships had bypassed the outer defenses, using stealth insertion pods to deploy their teams across key locations on Vega Prime. Now, as the first wave of soldiers touched down, the real war began. "All units, engage at will," Blackwell ordered, his voice steady. "We're bringing our people home." Dropships screamed through the sky, their hulls glowing red-hot as they cut through the atmosphere. Railgun fire lanced downward, shredding Zarkari anti-air defenses before they could respond. On the ground, UEDF soldiers moved with ruthless precision, cutting down Zarkari forces in coordinated strikes. The once invincible alien warriors found themselves outmatched, their ranks crumbling under the sheer brutality of human retaliation. Inside the prison camp, Ava and her fighters saw their chance. "This is it," she told them. "We take the armory. We take control." With newfound weapons and the fury of the oppressed, the prisoners surged forward, overwhelming the remaining Zarkari. Ava led the charge, her stolen rifle kicking against her shoulder as she put down anything that moved. She did not fight for survival. She fought for vengeance, for every prisoner they had tortured, for every human they had taken. The war for Vega Prime had begun, and the Zarkari were losing. Ava knelt on the cold, blood-stained metal of the prison's upper walkways, her fingers tightening around the sniper rifle she had pried from a fallen Zarkari officer. The weapon was heavier than her standard-issue UEDF rifle, built for the massive, clawed hands of its former owner, but she adjusted quickly. She had used alien weapons before. Death, after all, didn't care what kind of gun you used, only that you knew how to use it. Through the scope, she watched the chaos unfold below. The Zarkari were panicking. She could see it in the way their formations broke apart, in the way their golden eyes darted wildly through the darkness. They were used to being the hunters, the dominators. They weren't used to being the prey. Ava exhaled slowly, centering, her aim on an officer barking orders. The Zarkari's armor was thick, but their leadership insignia gleamed under the dim prison floodlights. Perfect. She pulled the trigger. A sharp crack split the air, followed by the wet sound of impact. The officer's body jerked backward. A clean hole punched through his forehead. He crumpled, his command cut short in an instant. Panic spread like wildfire. The Zarkari had always mocked human firearms as primitive, inefficient. But Ava knew the truth. Human snipers were something else entirely. They were ghosts, killing, from impossible distances, taking heads before the enemy even knew they were being watched. She shifted her aim, lined up her next shot, and fired again. Another officer down, then another. Each shot was precise, calculated. She wasn't just thinning their ranks, she was dismantling their command structure piece by piece. The remaining Zarkari scrambled for cover, but there was no cover. The prison walls, once their fortress, had become a hunting ground. Ava was the hunter. Outside the prison walls, the battlefield had become a war zone. UEDF drop pods smashed into the ground, their hulls glowing from atmospheric entry. As soon as the doors blew open, human soldiers stormed forward, weapons blazing. Captain Adrian Blackwell led the charge, his rifle raised as his team cut through the outer defenses like a blade through flesh. "Push forward," he roared. "Clear every sector." The Zarkari scrambled to form a defensive line, but the humans were relentless. Precision railgun fire tore through their ranks, sending bodies flying. Grenades exploded in quick succession, shattering barricades and reducing enemy cover to rubble. Inside the prison, Ava and her resistance fighters seized the moment. "Now!" she called, and her team surged forward, unleashing their stolen weapons on the confused and disoriented guards. It was a perfect ambush. The Zarkari were caught between two fronts, the prisoners striking from within, the UEDF pressing in from outside. There was no escape. Varesh stood at the heart of the chaos, his once confident snarl now laced with uncertainty. He had always believed in the Zarkari's superiority. But now, watching his warriors fall like insects, he realized something horrifying. This was not a mere rescue mission. This was extermination. The battle should have lasted longer. The Zarkari were bigger, stronger. Their technology was advanced, their weapons terrifying. But none of that mattered. Humanity didn't fight like the other species the Zarkari had crushed beneath their boots. They didn't rely on brute force, didn't charge blindly into battle. They fought with precision, with strategy, with ruthless intent. Snipers eliminated Zarkari who tried to run. Drones swept through the battlefield, marking high-value targets for orbital strikes. Mechanized UEDF infantry units, clad in power armor, advanced without fear, their rotary cannons, tearing through enemy lines. The Zarkari weren't just losing, they were breaking. Varesh, watching his forces disintegrate, felt something unfamiliar curl in his gut. Fear. He had mocked humans for their emotions, had called them weak for their compassion, for their sentimentality. But what he saw now wasn't weakness. It was something else entirely. He saw the way the human soldiers moved together, how their fire teams covered every angle, how their attacks were not random but orchestrated. He saw wrath, and he knew in that moment that the Zarkari had made a mistake. Varesh ran. He had lost battles before, but never like this. Never against an enemy so relentless, so methodical. He sprinted through the wreckage of his own war camp, his breath ragged, his mind racing. His personal shuttle was docked just outside the perimeter. If he could reach it, he could escape. He could warn the Zarkari High Command, tell them what had happened here, tell them that humanity was not to be underestimated. But he never made it to the shuttle. A single gunshot rang out. Varesh froze, his body tensing. A sharp, searing pain bloomed in his chest. He looked down, a bullet hole dead center. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the cold ground. He gasped for breath, his vision blurring. In the distance, through the haze of smoke and fire, he saw her Ava Connors, standing atop a ruined guard tower, sniper rifle in hand. Her expression was unreadable, not triumphant, not angry, just calm. The last thing Varesh saw before the darkness took him was a single human soldier, staring down at him through the scope of a rifle. Then, nothing. The battle was over. The prison camp had been liberated. The Zarkari forces had been annihilated. The humans did not take prisoners. As UEDF warships hovered above the smoldering ruins of the battlefield, Captain Blackwell surveyed the aftermath. His troops were already securing the last remaining sectors, but the fight was done. Ava approached, rifle slung over her shoulder. Her uniform was torn, stained with blood. Some hers, most not. Blackwell met her gaze. "That was a clean shot," he said. Ava didn't respond. She simply nodded, watching as the human flag was raised over what was once a symbol of Zarkari dominance. A warning. A promise. Vega Prime belonged to humanity again. And the Zarkari Empire? They would never forget this day. The battlefield was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, the kind that followed death. Smoke rose from the shattered remains of the Zarkari stronghold, and the acrid scent of burnt flesh lingered in the air. UEDF soldiers moved methodically through the ruins, ensuring that no Zarkari remained. There would be no survivors. Captain Blackwell watched as his troops secured the last remaining structures, clearing out any stragglers. Most of the Zarkari were already dead, their bodies strewn across the broken prison yard. A few had tried to surrender, dropping their weapons and begging for mercy. None had been taken prisoner. The UEDF had made their stance clear. This wasn't just a battle. This was a message. Ava stepped over the body of a fallen Zarkari officer, her sniper rifle still warm from its last shot. She looked over at a group of newly freed prisoners, their faces hollow with exhaustion, but burning with something else. Vindication. Some wept. Others just stood there, staring at their broken captors with cold, unreadable expressions. Ava turned back to Blackwell. "It's done," he nodded, taking one last look at the field of bodies. "Good. No loose ends?" The mission was over, but the war was far from finished. The message was sent within the hour. It was broadcast across the Galactic network, an unencrypted transmission that every empire, every colony, every warlord could hear. The video feed opened, with the remains of the Zarkari stronghold, a fortress reduced to rubble, its once mighty defenders now lifeless. Then, a voice, strong, unyielding, human. "To any empire that dares to take our people, know this. We will come for you, and we will not stop until your empire is nothing but ashes." The message was short, direct, the meaning undeniable. On the Zarkari homeworld, the High Command watched the broadcast in silence. For centuries, they had ruled through fear, crushing weaker species beneath their boot. But now they were the ones afraid. They had thought humanity was weak, thought they could raid a colony, capture humans, and never face consequences. They had been wrong, and, the worst part, they knew this was only the beginning. Ava stood on the highest ridge overlooking the battlefield. Her rifle was slung across her back, her hands resting on her hips. She wasn't smiling. There was no sense of triumph, no moment of celebration, because this war wasn't over. Not even close. Captain Blackwell walked up beside her, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Command wants us back on the ship. There's already talk of the next strike." Ava nodded. "Where?" "Zarkari space." She exhaled slowly. "Good." Blackwell glanced at her, studying the way her fingers subconsciously traced the edge of her rifle. "You're not done, are you?" She shook her head. "Not until they remember this day forever." There was a long pause, then Blackwell chuckled. "You know, you're starting to sound like a legend." Ava turned to face him, her expression steady, unwavering. "Let's make sure they never forget us." The war fleet was already mobilizing. UEDF warships, sleek and deadly, lined the void above the now liberated colony world. Their hulls gleamed. In the dim starlight, each vessel a testament to human engineering and warcraft. This wasn't a defensive maneuver. It wasn't a containment operation. This was an invasion. Inside the fleet's command center, admirals and strategists studied the projected assault plan. The Zarkari were already in retreat, pulling their forces back to their core worlds. It wouldn't save them. The humans weren't waiting. The final shot of the transmission, seen by every major power in the galaxy, was unmistakable. Earth's war fleet, engines burning bright, moving in perfect formation toward Zarkari space. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning.